Greetings and welcome to a Center for Enlightenment production, brought to you by Mythology. Today we'll be looking at a few things: the tree of life, the tree of knowledge of good and evil, the serpent, manna and hidden manna. These are all mysteries that are enclosed in the Bible, which if we could understand better what they were, or what people believed they were, we might better understand the Bible itself. So let's begin with the tree of life. The tree of life is mentioned in the first book of the Bible, Genesis, as well as in the book of Revelation. We have its first mention in Genesis 3:22, which I'll read to you. And the Lord God said, "The man is now become like one of us, knowing good and evil. He must not be allowed to reach out his hand and also take from the tree of life and eat and live forever." So God banished them from the Garden of Eden to work the ground from which they had been taken. So we have this tree of life, and it being considered a very real thing in the Garden of Eden. Then we have to ask ourselves, what was this tree of life? Before we can answer that, let's look at the tree of knowledge of good and evil. The tree of knowledge of good and evil is considered to be that fruit which illuminates the mind but deadens the heart and disconnects us from the empathetic connection of life, the ability to feel what others feel, and therefore through empathy, empathizing with them, bring no harm. Do unto others as you would have done to yourself. So this tree of knowledge of good and evil looks to be, according to this 12th century French painting or French fresco found in a church in France, naturally, it looks to be like the Manna muscaria. The Manna muscaria is the big red mushroom with the white spots on it, the Santa Claus mushroom. Now, instinctively, hunter and gatherer, or man and woman, would have recognized that this thing looks potentially psychoactive, but also potentially deadly. It has a stop sign-like quality to it. So this tree of knowledge of good and evil, shown here, is better represented by this artist rendition, which I did myself, here. You can see the big red Manna muscaria done up like a tree with branches. In its branches you can see there's a frog, which gives you the proportion. This thing is not so large as an actual tree, but it's done the size of Eve. So it's done up to represent its tree-like nature. But it's kind of hidden from the eyes of those who would eat this mushroom if they knew what it was, so that people would not be privy to this information. But it says in the scriptures that in the last days that knowledge will be increased greatly, and so with that knowledge comes out this advocate, or this tree of knowledge of good and evil, Manna muscaria, as the actual tree that Eve and Adam ate from. Now, if this was the tree of knowledge of good and evil, which this German church shows the big red fly agaric cap, Beelzebub's name plant. So Beelzebub is the devil, and Beelzebub means Lord of Flies. A Manna muscaria is called a fly agaric because flies are drawn to it and stunned by its toxicity. So here we have Adam and Eve with the tree of life on the right, showing Jesus in it. But we have the tree of knowledge of good and evil, where Adam and Eve ate the apple and fell. So here's a picture of the apple, or the tree of knowledge of good and evil, a Manna muscaria, with its bright red cap and white spots. And here is a Brahmin bull, for in the East it was known as the red bull of the mountain. This Soma prototype was used by the Brahmins in their rituals. It's put upside down here underneath the neck of the bull, but if you flip it over, you can see that the big red Manna muscaria, it's not red here, is being crushed by a stick into a bucket. So that was the way it was prepared. It was prepared by pounding or pulverizing it. Now, among the Maya, this mushroom is known as the evil mushroom. And you can see here a priest who is a partaker of a Manna muscaria because of the little headpiece where he shows the mushroom in his head, in his hair. And the Manna muscaria is set next to it to better illustrate that. So we have this rumor that it's the evil mushroom among the Maya. We have early pictures from the French church of a Manna muscaria. We have the Germans later, closer to the 16th century, saying the same thing. Here we have an early fresco of Adam and Eve picking what looks like a Manna muscaria out of the tree, and it's again got the red cap with the white spots on it. Here we have, if this was truly the tree of knowledge of good and evil, we would have a lot of people who believe that they are become gods by the consumption of it. So here we have an Egyptian priestess sitting down to a table which the sliced pieces of a Manna muscaria can still obscurely be made out. And that was because in Egypt they believed that the Pharaoh was a god, and so it was common for Pharaoh to eat this mushroom. Caesar also ate this mushroom, the Caesars. They actually have one mushroom called Caesar's mushroom, and it's an amanta, but it does not have the white spots, but it looks just like the Manna muscaria minus the white spots. It's an edible, but we have evidence from early Egypt, from the Brahmin culture, and from Rome. Less evidence of the Roman emperor eating this mushroom, but still enough evidence to support the idea that this is how the Roman emperor became a god. Now, if you've ever eaten this mushroom, you know that it makes you more nauseous than anything else, but that there's a secret knowledge or Gnosticism for preparing it, where you dry the fruit over the fire and the muscimol becomes ambiotic acid, so it becomes an active ingredient. And the Siberians were known for using it, Siberian reindeer herders, and the nature of its use was that they would consume it, and then the urine that they would then piss out was also psychoactive, and so you get your caste system created from your Brahmin priests at the top who eat the mushroom, and your warriors who consume their urine, then the merchants who consume the urine of the warriors. So it was a heavy knowledge-based thing that you could create a society around the use of this mushroom. So that's the tree of knowledge. Now, we've seen the serpent in the tree, and I think it's best to tackle the serpent next. The serpent, although I do not in any way say that that's not a real spiritual entity, that Lucifer is not real. His names were the morning star, or the glory of the morning, and it sounds a lot like morning glory. Here we see a symbol of a symbol. We see the actual flower of the morning glory. This is not an active species, but one of the many that do not contain the LSD-like substance. This plant, called Oliquia or Tiltiltzin by the Aztecs, was said in their records, in their historical documents, to have stood upright at one point. And that's one of the first leads, is the serpent in the Garden of Eden was said to have stood upright before he received the curse of God and was made to crawl on his belly in the dust. So this flower, from this flower we can see here the pentagram. And the pentagram is the five-pointed star with the circle around it, which is Lucifer's symbol for calling upon the devil. Still used in many pagan traditions. Among the Aztecs, we've got the idol or the statue of Xochipilli, that's his name. And Xochipilli is a Aztec statue which shows the morning glory here and here, the tendrils and the flower, as well as the psilocybin mushrooms in the ears and several other plants, including tobacco, which are all psychoactive properties. So these were the plants of the gods. But you see in their culture, they mixed them all and considered them all on the same plane, rather than sorting them out as the names of angels, both good and bad. Here again, we see the morning glory with the hummingbird, which was one of the serpent's symbols, was the snake and the hummingbird and the butterfly. The hummingbird and the butterfly both frequent the flowers of the morning glory, and so by association, they became symbols of Kukulkan, or the feathered serpent. Kukulkan is the Mayan name for the feathered serpent. It was called the feathered serpent by the Aztecs, or the fire serpent. The vision serpent by the Mayas. We'll look at that in a little bit. But it was a deity that the Franciscan friars had a very difficult time eradicating, because the people of the New World believed that this serpent plant contained a deity in its seeds. So the seed of the morning glory is what was crushed. Its head was crushed, and it was used for divination and for Aztec rituals, many of which were very bloody. So here we see Hathor from the Egyptian pantheon, and in the horns of Hathor we see the day star, or the morning glory, the glory of the morning, that five-pointed pentagram. Around it we see the symbol for life, eternal life. Going back to the New World, here's a blow-up picture, a composite picture of the feathered serpent, Kukulkan. And we see the morning glory closely associated with that by the artist. Among the Olmec, one of the earliest cultures in Mesoamerica, we see a seer of the feathered serpent, of this visionary serpent, sitting inside the body of a snake with a basket in his hands, and under the influence of the morning glory. The serpent was said to be, as you can see here, the deity is coming out of the mouth of the snake, and it's said that you could call upon him through bloodletting, and the vision serpent would appear and tell you a prognosis of your sickness, or give you divination insights. So a lot of stuff with divination, which of course is, not what you're looking for. You want direct communion with God, relationship with an angel of God to be his messenger. You don't want to go about divination style. Here we have a Greek mug with the morning glory leaves all around the top of the rim. He's got the preternatural ear and the goatee, and it looks exactly like Lucifer, and that is a morning glory. I propose a Greek morning glory drinking vessel. The transport of the morning glories, the active morning glory seeds from the New World, didn't have to get to the Greek culture because there were active morning glories in the Old World. The Hawaiian baby wood rose was one of them, very active. Contained about 25 micrograms of LSD per seed. So here we have the Masonic order, the Freemasons. You can see the compass and the square, and next to it you see the deity that the Freemasons worshipped, Lucifer, the bearer of light, which Albert Pike, one of their headmasters, declared that it's Lucifer at the top of the Masonic belief system, the 33rd degree, that they worship. So you see the snake plant with the little head of the devil next to the square and compass. Now this morning glory, this serpent, Lucifer, was known in Teotihuacan, the great pyramid structure of the New World, equal in its size and vastness almost to the Great Pyramid of Gaza. Here we see the head of the serpent with the profundity of petals around the head. And that's the part that you crush. You crush the head of the serpent, as it says in Genesis. And that, if you can look here, if you see here, the seed pod looks a whole lot like the head of the serpent. And so that's where they're deriving the artistic rendering of the seed pod from. The serpent's head is this seed pod. Now we have kind of more modern art, if you want to call it that, although diabolic is more its artistic framework. We have the goat of Mendes, where you see the goat's head, Lucifer's head. In his body you see the Kaduka, or the medicine symbol, and on his head you see the torch, or the pillar of knowledge. And if you look at that closely, you'll see that it has the same couplings that hold the seed pod together. In fact, if you look at this picture of the seed pod, and then I just transpose that to the head of the goat of Mendes, or Lucifer's head, you see where his knowledge is coming from. These are the seeds from the New World, called Aliquia and Tiltilzin. They were crushed in this temple of the serpents in Teotihuacan using these seed pod crushers. So these are grinding stones that you can see here in green, and they are the capsule head. So they're made in the image of the seed pods that they are designed to crush the seeds of. So that's the tree, that's the serpent. So he has a name, which is the morning glory, and you can, it's an LSD-like compound that does not have the moral scruples or the conscience that's activated through the tree of life or psilocybin. So when people use LSD or morning glories, they would, in the Aztecs' case, cut out hearts on altars, or in the case of Charles Manson, kill people, be a mass murderer. And using LSD at the same time indicates that there's no contradiction between mass murder and LSD. It seems to Not that LSD will make you a mass murderer, but a murderer can use LSD without a prick to his conscience. Whereas among the people of Mexico, the Oaxacan people, called the Maztec Indians, the town was split into two different groups. The people who practiced the mushroom were called the Wise Ones, or Sabinas, and they would use it for healing and for communion with God. Sometimes they would talk about mountain deities or corn deities, but they primarily spoke about God and about healing. Whereas the witches used the morning glory seeds and would actually go quite insane from the use of the mushroom. So here we have the tree of knowledge of good and evil, the serpent or the morning glory. So we got Beelzebub, or Satan's name, is the big red Amanta Muscaria. The morning glory is the name of Lucifer, the light bearer. And then the tree of life we have here. You can see an early church wall which shows the three psilocybin mushrooms right next to Jesus. And he's holding up a saint, praising them. And we have a stained glass window from the 16th century which shows two saints at the cross. And in their halo we see blue and gold mushroom caps and stems. This is, I'm kind of going a little fast here, but I figure you do know about the tree of life already. So I want to get on to some of the symbolism that's in the Bible regarding the tree of life. And that has to do with Jesus and his upbringing in Egypt, where he would have been aware of the Egyptian belief in a goddess called Hathor. We showed the picture of the horned cow with the morning glory flower in its headpiece for the star of the morning, or the sun. This was a contention over whether Jesus is represented by the sun or whether Lucifer is represented by the sun. And that goes back to their name plants and the battle for human devotion, one way or the other. Here we have a Bible page. This is from an early Bible, and inscripted in it is the tree of life next to Jesus at the cross. And you can see the two saints there are staring at this tree of life. Another picture from a church in, I believe, Germany, which has been identified by other associates and colleagues in the field as the tree of life, or as psilocybin, particularly as psilocybin, but it would be the tree of life because it causes neurogenesis, or the growth of neurons, and generally produces a well-being in its practitioner, health. So here we have a fig tree called the sycamore fig tree, and this was what one of the tax collectors wanted to see Jesus. This is from Luke, the Gospel of Luke. In fact, I'll just read it to you. The sycamore fig was sacred to Hathor. And Jesus, knowing about the connection between the sycamore fig as a symbol for the tree of life, like the palm tree, recognized that. So Zacharias was the tax collector, and Jesus, entering Jericho, was passing through. There was a man named Zacharias there, the chief tax collector, and was very wealthy. He wanted to see Jesus, but was too short a man. So, and because of the crowd, he ran and climbed a sycamore fig tree to see him better, since Jesus was coming that way. When Jesus reached the spot, he looked up and said to him, "Zacharias, come down immediately. I must stay at your house today. So Jesus was a man who looked at the symbolism of things, seeing this sacred tree, this sycamore fig tree, which other prophets, Amos included, were associated with. They said to be tenders of the flock, as well as the sycamore fig tree. This sycamore fig tree represents psilocybin. So seeing Zacharias in the tree immediately caused Jesus to say, okay, that's a sign from God. I'm supposed to spend a dinner with Zacharias. And Zacharias immediately gave away half of his wealth and promised to make better anybody who he had cheated. So here's the sycamore fig tree in Egypt. We see a pharaoh being nursed by the sycamore fig tree. So the sycamore fig was one of the trees that would grow out in the middle of the desert at the edge of water. And so finding it meant that you found life, because you found water in the desert. So the pharaohs would often show themselves around Hathor's sacred tree, the sycamore fig, which represents the psilocybin mushroom also. And here we have, to kind of really hit home, we have Moses, and you can see it's Moses because there's a pair of shoes set beside the bush, meaning it's holy ground that he was walking on. And we have Jesus in the tree of life as a mushroom, as a fiery mushroom, or the burning bush, appearing to Moses. So this is a later, probably 16th century stained glass window depicting Moses meeting God and Jesus through the tree of life, or the burning bush. That brings us to the last two pieces, which are manna and hidden manna. Manna means, what is it? And what it was a disc-like mushroom that grew on the ground where the dew fell. So when the dew would fall around the Israelites in their 40 years wandering in the desert, they were fed by this manna that would come up in the morning. And the manna, you can see here people gathering. This is a picture from one of the later artworks on the manna that the Israelites gathered. There are mushrooms that we don't know the exact mushroom that this was, but that it was a mushroom is pretty much certain because of its qualities. It was the color of coriander, it grew in the dew, and here we see juicer, which probably looked a bit like what the manna looked like. And you can see how the juicer actually looks like an ear. The rumor is that Jewish people have ears everywhere, and so juicer was named after that. But you can see that manna got worms if it was not preserved properly. And here we have a picture of a mushroom with worms, indicating that that's the most likely subject or object for manna to have been. Here we have a basket of mushrooms, much like the baskets of manna. But that brings us to something described in Revelation, which was called hidden manna. When John is writing to the churches, he says, if you are obedient to the words of Christ and stick to the good true path, the narrow way, then you'll be given some of the hidden manna to eat. So here we have a 6th century gold medallion. Doesn't look very gold here, but on close examination of this gold medallion, we find that it's the life of Christ, and that he is performing his various miracles. We have the blind seeing, where the guy had a cane, like a walking cane for the blind, and Jesus is approaching him. Behind Jesus is the psilocybin mushroom symbol. which has got its little pointed cap or umbo on top, and just generally characteristic of psilocybin mushrooms. Here the man who was let down through the house with the bed is on his back now because he's been healed. He was a paraplegic. And Jesus is showing him these psilocybin mushrooms, which you can see him gathering. The lame walking, again, a stick behind the person is the psilocybin mushroom. So this hidden manna was the tree of life, or was the psilocybin mushroom. Okay, well that concludes this episode of Enlightenment. Hope you've enjoyed it, and have a wonderful day. Bye-bye.